second that you think something's not new, then like I think that's when we get into the rut of like it's mundane. That's where I think having that childlike perspective on life is like everything is cool. Is that younger version of myself gonna be like happy to see that this is the life I'm living, right? Kind to yourself of like what makes you happy and express, like really expressing it.
Highest Version Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Highest Version Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Fulvong, and on this podcast, we talk about falling in love with the process of getting better every day and becoming the highest version of ourselves. Today's guest is Ellie Ringpis. From a city girl to a woman of service to someone who has been to pretty much all over the nation. She is someone that seeks adventure in every corner of the world. Seriously, she'll make you either go on a difficult hike or a band hike. Ellie. Ellie takes pride in being a mother to her 3 lovely children and a wife to her wonderful husband, Jeremy. There is no surprise that Ellie is a kid at heart, as she is a true Disney lover. Just like her social media captions, as she says hello to a new city or hello to a famous food, a highest version wants to welcome and says hello, Ellie. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Ellie Ringpis. Hey, Ellie, how are you doing?
Thank you. That was an awesome intro. I love it.
Oh, man. I was like, what can I do to make this more dynamic? And I have to say, I did have to stalk your social media page to see what dirt I can get on you.
You scrolled way back there for all the hello captions.
I was like, wow, she's really saying hello a lot to like this. And I was like, I'm going to get her so bad. So it's a deep cut and an inside joke. But I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you are, taking the time to talk to me about your story and what you are doing to become the highest version of yourself. And of course, this would have happened if me and my fiance, Michelle, didn't decide to go to Hawaii. So before we get into our whole journey, let's talk about the main question of this show. And that is, how is your mental health nowadays?
Good. On the rise. I mean, I think with most people, it's a ongoing process, right? Like you go ups and downs. And I think the big thing, especially like as we're talking about this today, is like understanding where your core is at and something that you can kind of fall back to as your foundation. And like for me, right, like that this is going to be a theme that's going to get brought up a ton of like finding that core in your like childlike behaviors. And it's like your innate foundations. And once I kind of self-reflect and bring myself back to that core, it's a really good kind of foundation to like look at life and kind of bring things into perspective. And then for me, I think that puts me in a very healthy place to never kind of dip too low, right? Like I think we have that journey where we have ebbs and flows, but the main thing is, right, you don't want to get too low, right? That's a hard thing to climb out of.
Yeah. And when you talk about your core, are you talking about like values, like who you are as a person that keeps you grounded in your mental health?
Yeah. And then also just like that self-reflection, right? Like something to be that baseline, especially at like a perspective of going back to like if anything happens, you're like in that moment, in that heat of the moment, it could be really tough or it could be super, like you could think it's like the end of the world, right? And then you kind of like take that perspective back and like take that step back and realize, hold on, wait, this is like in the perspective of my kids, right? They're like, this is not a big deal, right? Taxes, right? Like I think I waited till the last possible day to file my taxes. So like that could be super stressful, on a day-to-day basis. But then you take it a step back and you're like, wait, hold on. Like we can get it done.
Yes.
Kids don't even know what taxes are, right? Like
no, they do not. But you are also in paradise too in Hawaii as well. So that hopefully brings you back to your core. So.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get into our questions, I have a little surprise for you. For every new guest, I always like to dedicate a Funko Pop to them because I love Funko Pops. It's just like an action figurine. As you can see, I have one of myself. So the Funko Pop that I have dedicated to you, and I feel like this may be no surprise, is, get a drum roll please, is Ellie from Up. And of course, this makes a lot of sense as a Disney lover. And when I see you again, this will be your present. But as we know, Ellie is a character that is very family oriented. She has a beautiful relationship with Mr. Fredrickson, but we know that the thing that they bonded over was adventure. And for someone, as I said in my intro, that seeks adventure highly, I mean, Ellie just makes sense, and it just so happens that you guys have the same name. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, my comparison with Ellie, and I feel like you kind of had a story about her, but me and Michelle like couldn't remember.
I did. Oh, funny story about that. So I think it came out when I was maybe in middle school or high school, like up. And I remember I was so ecstatic when I found out there was going to be a character named Ellie. So I
Mhm.
was like, all right, cool. Like this is Disney and this is Pixar. Like how are they going to portray like when you think of Ellie, like what do they think of, right? And I just remember, and this is a really good representation of that Funko, by the way, is like I remember the very first time Ellie pops up on the screen, she's like
Mhm.
that. She's like puffy, like frizzy hair,
Yeah, yeah.
goggles on, and I was like, oh no,
No. Oh
seriously, she's
man.
like the wackiest child ever. And like at that time, like I think, you know, as you're navigating through middle school and high school, there's a lot of like the outside perception of you that you kind of like end up thinking is like that is your perception and like how people like you become very aware of the outside factors, right? Like the external factors,
Hmm.
how you look, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, I think that was how it was reflected at first. I was like, oh man, like this girl is like crazy looking, and so I was like, no. But then, like as I grow up and like as I like watch the movie, of course, you're just like
Hmm.
you realize there's so much beauty within her and
Yeah.
like with her adventures, with her like perception of life. And it like I love her character so much. And she's taught me so much in that movie as well, because I think there's a nugget of like understanding as adventurous as I am, I feel like I have had to learn over the years of it's not just like checking those things off as like a
Hmm.
list, right? Like
Hmm.
that's not adventure for me anymore in the sense of like it's who you share it with, right? And it's like the journey of it. So it's not just like because I think I look back, I think earlier in my 20s, like I went on a bunch of trips, but none of them were really as memorable. Like
Hmm.
you're like knocking off those like you're like tick marks and you're like, yeah, I did this, I did this. But
Hmm.
then now looking back, I'm like, wait, it's the ones that you get to actually like be in those deep conversations on those hikes and you get
Yeah.
to like really kind of like make a memory out of those moments
Hmm.
that's better than at the end you're like, wait, that's better than the view. And that's what Up showed me too, where it was like in my head, I was like, oh man, at the very first time I watched the movie, I was like, she never got to go to, the Paradise Falls.
Right.
And then now, like watching the movie, I was like, no, this, like her whole life was an amazing adventure. And she like got to cherish that with the people that she loves. Right. So that was a huge takeaway for me and like really putting that perception of like, and she took even like the mundane things, right? The day to day activities. She took that with so much joy and so
Yeah.
much of that like childlike wonder and like having so much fun with that was her adventure, and that was
Yeah.
like the coolest part.
Yeah. I mean, Ellie taking life as her own adventure is just something we can all take a lesson from. I
Yeah.
just feel like in our day to day, we are so. I like to have the term like being on autopilot. Like when we're on autopilot, we kind of
Yeah.
don't think of these things and really take like the mundane things and make it mundane versus like how Ellie had her perspective of life of, this is I'm going on a walk. Let's make this very exciting, or let's
Yes.
make imagine like a creation out of stars and making her own type of different reality that we sometimes forget. We forget that imagination part of our lives too.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a huge thing, like where we lose that creativity a little bit and like
Hmm.
having that imaginative like flow through your body. And like that's huge where I benefit a lot where like, I see my young kids growing up right in front of my eyes and like that day to day where they just want to play and they want to explore. And yeah, like you're saying, a simple walk is like they are freaking like jumping through lava or like, and mind you, I mean, they're like jumping off of trees, right? And like this
Yeah.
is a whole thing for them. And like once I kind of see that and see that much like possibilities in their eyes, you're like,
Mm,
why can't I play like that? Like why can we
mm,
not see those like life through those lens anymore? Because it's like the coolest walk ever, right?
hmm.
Like going just down the street. So that's like a huge takeaway where I'm like, we don't have to be like scaling Mount Everest, right? Or like,
Right.
right. But I mean, I do love like some really cool, challenging hikes, but like, the day to day could be really fun as well.
Yeah, I mean those well, those hikes kind of scare your husband Jeremy a little bit, especially for your youngins and jumping off near a cliff. And I know you posted like a recent hike, and I was like, both me and Michelle were like, uh, I'm pretty sure Jeremy did not like that. As Callie was getting closer, Callie, who's your daughter, Callie is getting closer to the edge of the hike, and we're like, oh my god. And just like Jeremy, like I also have those heart drops for her, even though our history together isn't even that long.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a thing where it's like getting to, I think it's two tiered, right? It's like getting to even step out the door to have like that simple walk and like enjoying that adventure. And then like, also having like the more extensive hikes and stuff, like just having those exposure to like be creative or to let your mind wander, like those things really build a really good foundation. And I see it with my kids too where it's like they get that experience and then they like start, before you know it, people are like, how are they doing this? And it's like they've been exploring this since they're like really little and like they've been having a blast with it, even with the simple ones, the harder ones, like
Hmm.
they get a mix of all of it, which is really cool.
Yeah, me and Michelle only hope when we have a kid that they're as adventurous and as thrill and braving as your kids are. So we'll have to like learn from you first.
It's a lot of gut checks too, for sure.
Yes, yes. All right, Ellie. Before we get into the deeper questions, I think we have to let the audience know how we know each other, and I think a good basis for it is, you were already out in Hawaii with your family, due to like some work location stuff. For me and Michelle, like we were out there because we are fully remote workers, and we're like, okay, let's go to Hawaii because that's always a dream for us. And being in Hawaii for a month, a big passion of Michelle's was volunteering and service. And we luckily crossed paths at the Diamond Head hike for volunteering. And I think we just hit it off from the start, and I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. It's because I was lollygagging over your
Admiring
husband's
my
calves.
admiring the tabs.
And ever since then, we just had a similarities with just the passionate to be like outside hiking and taking in those views and kind of experiencing life. And yeah, I mean, I just want to get your thoughts, or if you can tell the viewers about your experience meeting these young kids that are just out there and that are not in Hawaii or only visiting for a month.
Wow, you guys, you just made yourself sound younger. You're like young kids.
I have to. Okay, we're almost to 30.
And you made me sound like a wise old like soul. But no, it was yeah. Us meeting each other was just kind of like one of those things that like you get to take those opportunities and like that kind of just like fate, right? And
Hmm.
super super cool because we had just moved, I think, a couple months beforehand. So my husband's in the Coast Guard, and we moved that last summer to Hawaii from Washington D.C. and we like were just getting established, trying to get our routine in. And we also found the Diamond Head hike through 808 cleanups. And we're like,
Hmm.
well, we want to do something, that's giving back to service while also kind of staying active, exploring the area and doing good, while we're exploring the area. And so we went on that hike, and I think that might have been the first time the whole family went, because I think the first time was just Callie and I, and then
Mm.
my daughter and I, and then I think that was the first time it was like a bigger group. It was like my husband, our youngest rider, and Callie and myself, and then Jaden I think was still in school.
Mm.
So yeah, we got there and it was awesome because it's a smaller knit group, right? And so like getting
Yeah.
to do introductions and like especially when you're in a new place, like getting to meet people is like super like important to kind of building a community and like just feeling like you belong somewhere, even though
Hmm.
those people are just transients and they only stay for a month and then they leave you. But
Oh, we're
no, it's
coming
like,
back. Trying.
but, but it's awesome because I think that like you said, it was an instant connection of like some of those like foundational wanting to give back, wanting to explore, and
Mm.
also it is a kind of like sensing that childlike wonder and excitement and adventure
Mm.
within you guys, I think made it very easy to connect because that's a huge thing that I think sometimes seeing like kids how they navigate the world, they navigate with such openness to kind of like all their senses. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like later on in life we kind of let one of our senses dictate the rest and kind of like trick our brain. Like I was saying, kind of in middle school or high school, where we start thinking like how you see people, like their external factors, right? Like
Mm.
that starts dictating, like you start making those assumptions, you start judging a book by its cover, those
Yeah.
things, right? And kids are so good about like using all their senses, right? And having that innate ability to be like, this person's cool. Like I want to talk to them. I want to hang out with them. And
Yeah.
so that's something I see where it's like, it's not how they look, right? It's not how they speak, how they it's that feeling, right? And they take all of that into account to be like, oh, I want to go like hold their hand and hike up Diamond Head. And like
Yeah.
we've never met you before. So like I think that was really, really telling of like, all right, my kids like you like us. Like it was just
Hmm.
very, very obvious from the get go of like, ah, this is an awesome friendship.
Yeah. I know you use your kids as a vibe checkers.
Yes, have your kid talk to all the strangers.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway from this podcast.
That is literally the takeaway, I guess. I should put a do not like disclaimer. Do not try at home.
Yeah. I was just
uh
explaining to Callie, I was like, shoot, like how do I layer this? Because we're in Hawaii and it is a very
mhm.
kid friendly community. Like, how do
Yes.
I layer this to like have her not talk to the wrong kind of strangers? And she's like, but they're all aunties and uncles. And I was like, oh, ooh, this is gonna be a lot harder.
I know. That's so cute though that she says all our aunties and uncles because that's, we would love
You
to
want the
have that in
world
a
to be like
perfect
that, right?
world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. All right, Ellie, gotta get into the deeper questions now. And my first question to you is you talk a lot about your child, like the childlike awe and happiness that we lose as we get older. Just from your perspective, what do you think makes us lose that as we get older and older?
Ooh, good question. So I think it is when we start taking those external factors to be the only factors. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like we learn, of course, like there is, we have life, we have responsibilities, we have roles. And as we get older, right, we take on more of those responsibilities and we take on more of those roles. And I think that is when we start thinking that that's the only way to see life. And
Hmm.
like, for example, like when I was younger, um, there's pressures, right? And I know you did a little bit of an intro of like I used to be a figure skater in our little like podcast Instagram post, right?
Yes.
And so like speaking a little bit of that, like when I was maybe 5 or 6, I started figure skating. I went to a birthday party, loved it.
Mhm.
And my parents were at least very open to being like, "Ooh, this is something she likes. Let's give it a try."
Mhm.
And I'm so appreciative of that. Like I've had a really good experience, and like that's been a lot of things that have formed my way of thinking is, the time that I've been able to competitively figure skate. But essentially, I figure skated from 6 to 11 or 12, and
Mhm.
um, it started off fun. It started off super fun, and I loved every second of it. And then you just start some of those pressures start coming in, right? Because you want to hit certain milestones. And
Mhm.
of course, that sport is expensive. It is a super expensive sport with, your own custom skates are like, I think, if I remember correctly, it was like 300 a pair. Like they're expensive. And then it's like, that
Jeez.
doesn't even count for like, it counts for the boot. It doesn't count for the blade, right? Like there's a lot of things that it's like, do this for the, and then your rink time, the ice time, the
Mhm.
coaches, right? And at that point too, like in my ice skating career, like I had a coach for all the technical, like learning how to do the jumps and the spins. And then I also had a coach that was like they're a married couple, but it was like a coach that was the choreographer. So like
Hmm.
now you're talking about multiple coaches and then the ice time. And so it then I think you start losing that childlike enjoyment because now you're realizing like, oh, these are all the things that are getting put into your career. And
Mhm.
then I think money plays a huge factor, right? Like you start realizing that money is like how much it costs and like what's getting like, so those things I think start filling your brain and you start losing that, oh wait, this is fun, or like you feel that pressure and that stress. So I think it's really a thing of like now looking back, I wish I had just a little bit more of that balance for myself of like
Mhm.
still enjoying it. Because once you start stressing and you have those pressures, it's like then that directly correlates into like not performing well. Like that's
Yeah.
like, every athlete knows that when you're like your mindset's not in the right place, like then it's like that's the game over of it. And so I think that was a huge, huge thing of like noticing that it was all of those factors now, like thinking about when you start letting all of those and like yes those are important to acknowledge and know that that is what's playing a factor, but like when that becomes all consuming and that's all you can focus on, that's when like everything else like you're like, oh wait, like that the enjoyment goes away. So that's something that I'm like as an adult and like kind of looking at um how I like perceive myself and like how I want to be and model myself with my kids is like I got to keep that part alive, right? Like
Yeah.
and also like when you see older um like the older community too, it's like it's kind of like you want to see that whole span of like when you look at older people and like see the ones that are still like freaking, especially in Hawaii, there's like a really
Yeah.
good, healthy older community. And like
Yeah.
they're out there just like surfing and like
Mhm.
doing all the things because they're like, well, I still want to enjoy my life. I'm not gonna like sit here and just think about like my,
Ending. Yeah.
end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I think as we grow older, we tend to fill our minds with, like you said, like, a lot more like responsibilities, like
Yeah.
for example, taxes, doing that, getting a job, getting a
Yeah.
career, establishing all those things that I wouldn't say we, but some people tend to have a lot of worries about. For me growing up
Yeah.
too, it's like having the anxieties of being able to perform well in the classroom as well as get a job at a point where maybe the market isn't that great and
Yeah.
adhering to certain accomplishments of other people,
Yes.
therefore not making it enjoyable to do whatever it is that I was doing. And
Yeah.
my prime example is with dance. With dance, like I grew up loving it always. And every time, at least I grew up doing it my whole entire life. And in college, I joined a dance crew. And my parents would always ask me, this is just a fun thing, right? Like, this is not like a full on job. And
Yeah.
when that is like in your head, I feel like it takes away the fun of it because you're like, okay, I know this isn't gonna be my full time thing. Therefore, like, why do I need to put any effort into it? Why do I need to put any imagination towards it? So
Yes.
I think the term adulting has become, I feel like it leaves no room for play, which is
Yes.
what we're both talking about. Like, we need to allow that play to feed that inner child of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think you really hit a good point of like, and I see this a little bit more in the Asian community,
Mm-hmm.
where we are up against and totally understand the hardships of our parents and the older generation of like, they came to the US and they want to provide more and they want to like provide us a better life, right? But it is like you mentioned, there's the pressures of like ticking off those certain benchmarks. And like my parents, I think they did steer like they steered a little bit off course of like, wanting to be different where they're like, hey, okay, cool. Like you want to do ice skating, let's pursue it. But then
Mm-hmm.
I think where it shifted, where they're like, ooh, we did this step. But
Mm-hmm.
then instead of shifting that mindset just a little bit more of being like, are you enjoying this? It came with this track came with its own pressures. So you're like,
Uh,
oh man, like, you're like, hey, this is a different, this is definitely a different outlook of like, all right, cool. Like you want to become a professional ice skater. But then it came with like, ooh, but if you're going to become a professional ice skater, you got to make sure you do this. You got to make sure you hit this. You've got to be
mm-hmm.
like the first in these competitions or else like you won't be going on to this. And so like
Mm.
once that started formulating, I was like, oh man, it's not that much different from like, hey, an Asian parent being like, you are going to become a doctor. So,
Yep. Yep.
so it was like, oh shoot, like it is a cool, different, unique career path, but it turned into full blown like career path, right? Like
Yeah.
it came with steps, it came with pressures, it came with stress. And so like that is something I definitely see with Asian communities of like, how do we break that mold of it's not just transactional, right? It's not just so deeply rooted in like we have to get from A to B. We got to hit those milestones. And also like yes, we can hit those milestones and we could work hard. I think there's a difference sometimes what I see where like we can work hard and like they give us the pressures of like, you've got to like put your head down and like grind, right?
Yeah.
But and in their mind, it's like you cannot afford to have those childlike outlooks or like have that time to wonder and explore and you know imagine, right? Because you don't have that. Like in their perspective, it's like you don't have that mm, like novelty to do that. But
Mm.
I think that's a huge thing of like mentioning here is like you can still have that even when like life is tough. Like it's not something to have a childlike outlook. It's not something that you can or cannot afford, right? Like it's
Yeah.
something that we innately is just within us. Like we were all like children before, right? We were all,
Mm-hmm.
and so we all have had that outlook of life. So it's
Yeah.
all about just kind of like tapping back into that just to kind of like do a little gut check or just to kind of see from that perspective of like, is that younger version of myself going to be like happy to see that this is the life I'm living, right? Like that's something that I think sometimes I'm like, all right, cool. Like that's a good little like look back and reflection to see like, hey, is younger me happy of like this is the day to day that I'm living, right? Not just the big adventures or whatnot, right? Like
Yeah.
is it, at the end of the day when you go to bed at night, like is this something that you're like, all right, cool, like, we're enjoying our life.
As I've like gone through therapy myself, one of the major milestones was understanding my parents a lot more. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's just the typical journey of as you are in your high school and young college days, you're like, oh, I don't want to do anything with my parents, not et cetera, et cetera. But now that
Yeah.
after post, I'm like, okay, I need to remove this sense of authority from them and also remove their perspective about life and making my own unique perspective. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like because they grew up when they came here to the States that they had the immigrant mindset, like all they knew in their life was survival. And
Yes.
in that moment of survival, they didn't have a chance to have that childlike play. And obviously we're very fortunate that they gave us an opportunity to have that creativity and that childlike awe and happiness, because that's what they work hard for. And there's a period of life where we're like, okay, I need to make up for it. But now it's realizing also that doesn't have to be my perspective. The real
Yeah.
perspective is what I want to make of it. And from yours, it's having that childlike awe and imagination. And I would love to have that too. I feel like I was afraid that I became too serious in life
Yeah. Yeah.
because I was pressured to get A's quickly. I figured out my major by the age of 8. So it's like,
My God. Yeah.
when was there a time for really me to have that childlikeness?
Yeah.
I mean, I did always like to watch cartoons even at a quote unquote later age, whatever the that means. But like my dad would be like, "Why are you still watching this?" I'm like, "Cause it's funny, it's good, it makes me feel like I'm alive."
Yeah.
And I think
And
it's just
there's
that.
more lessons in there too. Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like it's just the perspective of survival
Yeah.
at
I,
their age, when they were our age versus us. Like we are fortunate and privileged to have that freedom, but it's we're trying to make the best of it.
yes. And then I think, well, also a good point with that too, or a little bit of like understanding there's maybe a differing in perspectives and in cultures, is even in those hardships. And like, it was actually kind of funny where, so my parents, they owned an ice cream store, growing
Hmm.
up. Yeah. And so, many, many hours at that ice cream store, like helping out as,
Yes.
child labor, Asian child labor works.
Were you scooping ice cream? Is that were you the one
Oh
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay?
Yes, I
Okay.
was. Yes, for sure. Scooping ice cream. If you ask me to do like a perfect swirl, I can do a really good ice cream swirl. But I think,
Pluses.
thank you. Yeah, no, my one talent, right? But no, but no, I think what was really eye opening, and my parents actually like noticed it and picked up on it, was like they would notice that, and this was more typically a like Hispanic culture, where
Hmm.
like they would come in and they wouldn't come like, you could tell that they're not, like financially, it's not like they're super wealthy. Like, it's not a super wealthy family, right? But you just kind of see that culture, like those types of people come in with their family, and they're not getting a bunch of ice cream or anything, but like you can even see in the kids and in the adults that they're just so happy and so like
Hmm.
ecstatic to just get ice cream for like,
Yeah.
and it's not, and it was really cool that my parents just, they would notice this, and like there is just pure joy in them eating that ice cream as a family whenever they do come in, and specifically with that culture, that sometimes I notice, it's like even in the hardships they dance. Even in the
Hmm.
hardships, they like can find that, like that moment or that opportunity. Like, let's just grab some ice cream, right? Like, obviously it's not a daily thing, but like when they get to do those things, it is just pure like happiness, right? And like
Yeah.
fully getting to be in that, like, and it's so like radiant. And like, it was just interesting that my parents noticed this, and I was like, well, like, how can this be reflected onto our family, right? Like, but
Oh,
no, but
it's. I
it,
feel like it's an even more difficult challenge there.
no, but no, they did do really, really well of like, hey, how do we incorporate that joy in the family? And that's also why I think I have that that perspective on life. Is I think it's a lot of it is like, there is some, like, as we're growing up, the some of that childhood trauma of like pressures and stress. But I think there's a big core of it too that I'm like, oh, my parents were really good about, wanting me to explore and enjoy and like take life as it is. And they had, for the most part, I think a decent balance of like, hey, you don't need to map out your entire life yet.
I see. Okay.
I mean, they do want, like, they did throw in those questions for sure. They're like, hey, what, like, maybe not like a 10-year plan, but what is your like 5-year plan?
5-year
What is
plan.
your
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, so I think it was really, really cool to see like that of like, I think noting even in the hard times, you can have things to better that outlook, and because the hard times don't have to be the way that you perceive it, like that's not the only mindset you can go into a hard or difficult situation, and like, I think that's the main thing of like understanding that you can always, like, even in the hard times, have a outlook that people may be like, oh, like, like, you don't have time for like the wondering and but that I think actually helps you get out of being in the rut, right? Because
Hmm.
if you're so transactional of being like A to B, B to C, like, you also lose the ability to think outside of the box,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like,
Mhm.
you lose that creativity, that imagination to be like, wait, like, I can have this avenue, right? Because it's so like laser focused, so narrow minded, I guess, in that sense of like, all right, I'm like, in the hard time right now. I have to get through it. And then you can't see anything else, right? So I think we are always afforded to have a little bit of that perspective to think outside the box. Whether or not we
Mhm.
take it is a different thing. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. I feel like a lot of companies and jobs and whatever my job will be is always asking for innovation. And if we can't be creative, then we can't
Yeah.
do that innovation part that they so desire for us to do. If we're transactional, sticking to the plan, like we have to be creative and think outside the box. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's also a good point that you had that our parents were also once kids too. That
Yeah.
they had that opportunity to really have this imagination and creativity, but they obviously, due to certain circumstances, like they had to cut that one short. And
Yeah.
in the explanation you were talking about, be able to still have that childlike awe even through the hard times. Have you gone through a difficult time in a part of your life and still was able to apply that kind of childlike awe you were talking about? Like, do you have an example from your own life that you can share with us?
Ooh, good question. So, um, uh, so yeah, yes, I do. With so you mentioned as like my intro, uh, I also was in the service. So my husband is still in the service in the Coast Guard. But after graduating high school, I went to the Coast Guard Academy, and with that, you have uh like 4 years of college, and then after that you do 5 years of service, and then
Hmm.
I have some classmates that stay in. For me, I decided to get out of the service after 5 years, but you essentially have a 5-year payback, right? And um that was definitely a tricky time. Like, I would say the entirety of the college and being in the service of it was very, um, almost like a 180. So just to give a little bit more background, like
Hmm.
kind of going back to my high school was a like humanities and arts high school. So
Hmm.
very liberal, very, 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 fun in the sense of like you had really cool opportunities to create and produce things. Like, one of the things in my high school was they had this production called Sing, and so students would. It was all student ran, so you would
Hmm.
have students come up with the script. You would have students like decorate and, create the backdrops and the props. And then you would have students choreograph the dances
I
and
see.
act. And so, yeah. And then you would do it as like freshmen and sophomores are together. And then, and then they compete against junior year's production, and then the senior year's production. So really cool thing. So you kind of go from that environment, and then you go into a military environment, which is very rigid and
Hmm.
very, very black and white in some ways. And so I think that was so like eye opening, and not realizing what I was missing until you're kind of like really in it, or you're like, wait, hold on. And I
Yeah.
started noticing, I was like, you're stripped of, because understandably so, like during boot camp, they do the boot camp the summer before you start college. So it's not even like you get like a summer with your high school friends. So you're like getting yelled at
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Yeah.
before your freshman year. So like that kind of, and there's a method to it, right? Like they're stripping you of that so that they can instill, certain behaviors and habits, and like and build that teamwork within the Coast Guard, right? And so that was really tough, of being like, this is like not enjoyable
It's
at
a very
all.
valid thing to say. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And then it took a little bit of time of like, first like acknowledging what was going on, or like where the difference was, right? Like, because I think I like at first didn't understand why it was so tough, or what was going on with my mindset, that just felt like I was lost, or like that I was just like that me as an individual didn't matter. Like,
Hmm.
because it's like you're stripped a little bit of that identity, right? And so understanding that and being like, like, what is that, right? And like doing that self reflection, and then like starting to build back up. So like there, the little wins. At our school, you could have like this one. So everything has to be super um organized and
Right.
structured, and your room is, like the bed's made a certain way,
Hmm.
like everything's cleared out, all that stuff. You do get one little shelf like in your room that you can personalize, and I personalized the shit out of that shelf.
Yeah. Everyone's like one trophy or like one picture. You just have this
I
confetti
had
and
like
like us.
yeah, yeah, and it was just really funny that I was like, oh, hold on, like, and seeking those opportunities to be like, wait a second, I can make this like my own, and that's my space. If that's the space that I'm allotted, I am going to fully fill up that space. So I had like Disney little like figurines, of course, and like
Hmm.
had cards from friends. I had like it was, and then I think it was like some certain things like dangled past that shelf.
I feel like your shelf was like the comparison of High School Musical, like how Sharpay had her locker versus everyone else had their locker.
Yes, for sure. I think it
Yeah.
was, but it was. I think like noticing like, hey, okay, like I can still express those things, and like that was the thing that I was like, all right, like that is a part of me, and I can still express it, and like if I am allotted only that little bit of space, like I'm going to I'm gonna like vomit my whole entire personality out on that that shelf.
Yes.
But
Yes.
like I think that, and then especially because like when you're working at your desk, that's the shelf that you see, right? So constantly those like reminders of like that helped me get through, that college phase of like, all right, and then of course like when you are able to broadcast that that's who you are, then you also like, I think, as I mentioned, like with the family in the ice cream store, like when you're radiating that energy, and like you're also going to receive like-minded people in that sense. And so like
Yeah.
getting to build those friendships of like, oh, people also equally, like having still a little bit of joy or
Hmm.
having a little bit of happiness in their life as they're getting woken up at 6 a.m. I forget what time, but like, yeah, like, but yeah. So, and then I think that was the same thing going into the service too, of like that, that day to day, like, you're like, how do you make, cause it's not even like so like, when I graduated, I was, on a boat or on a cutter, as the Coast Guard likes to call them, out of Alameda, California. And depending on the cutter size, also kind of dictates how far, like how long your deployments are. And
Mm.
so, mine was a like relatively larger one. So like we'd go out for like 3 months at a time. And realizing too, you're like, when you're out for 3 months at a time, or like, 100+ days, you can't, it's not like sometimes with work when we're like, oh yeah, we can look forward to the weekend, or, like you can kind of go on
Yeah.
autopilot and then just be like, well, Saturday's coming up soon, or like, Friday, 5 p.m. is coming up soon. But like with deployments, even on Fridays or like Saturdays and Sundays, we're like still working. Like we're working
Mm.
all the time. So having that perspective of like, well, you can't just autopilot those day to days, and like you got to find something that is enjoyable. And for me, it was like I had the best time like landing. So like one of the roles is it's called a landing signal officer, and you get to direct. So we have like a helipad at the back of the boat, and
Mm.
you get to direct them to land. And for me, that was like one, I think it's like you get to be outside, right? And you get to like, there's a little bit of that peace um, like in those moments of like waiting for the helicopter to circle around and like come
Mm.
land. And so
Mm.
there's some of that where it's like, all right, you have a little bit of that like solidarity in the mix of like being on a boat with hundreds of crew members. And so that was a lot of like finding that joy and like, little things of like, you get to have that time and you get to like wave them in. And
Yeah.
one of the fun traditions too with that is like, once the air crew, because they'll stay with us, they won't stay with us for the whole deployment, but when they leave, you have like standard signals of like how do you wave them in, how do you land them, and then how do you tell them like, hey, it's good to take off, because you gotta like this role, you have to look around and see like who, like make sure there's no birds and no obstruction and stuff.
Right.
And so one of the cool ones is like when they leave, you get to have fun with like however you want to send them off. So like I think one time, like, I like took them as like a little football and then threw them off the boat. Or like you get to, I think there was one actually that I ended up doing with Jeremy, because Jeremy was also on the boat with me, and that's how we
Mm.
met. He, I think, used me as like he like stuffed me as like a bazooka and like launched me off, and then that was like their signal to be like, go fly
Okay.
away. Yeah. So like, we have, and like people have like pretended to like golf and like, like,
Mm-hmm.
so there's like fun ways to kind of get creative and like send them off for the last time. So like, there's like little thing, and I think that's a really important thing to notice of like, that's one of those things. It's like, hey, we're in that hardship the entire time, right? Like we are on a deployment for 100+ days, and you can't just autopilot that. You can't just be in the suck of that the whole time, right? Like you've
Yeah.
got to find the joys of it. And, there's like other moments of those deployments where you get to see a ton of dolphins like following
Mm.
you, like on out in the ocean. You get to see like northern lights, right? Like there's those things where it's like you look back and you're like, oh wow, like I made the most of it,
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think that's kind of like how I went through long stories of like, like dealing with hardship, but like understanding it's not something you can or cannot afford. Like you can always have that perspective of like, because if you don't have that perspective, then you're just watching those dolphins go by and like being like, well, this still sucks.
Whatever. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like,
Yeah.
wait, no, this is really cool. And like, and kind of like, and it's the same situation, right? But just being able to view it differently. And I think that's so important. Like for our mental health of like life happens around us like
Mhm.
all the time, right? And if we just let it happen to us and not actually just be like, wow, that was so cool,
Mhm.
and like, and then we just like take for granted the mundane things, right? Like that's where I think having that childlike perspective on life is like everything is cool. Like if you let it
Yeah.
be, like everything is actually pretty freaking cool that happens around us and we just have to see it and acknowledge
Yeah.
it and take that in because if we don't then everything sucks.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, it really does. And I think you just touch a great point of just finding lightness through the darkness. And
Yeah.
also a huge thing with one of my therapy methods, or the analogy that she used the most when we were like talking about it, it was your camera lens and your perspective is way different than somebody else's. And we all have a choice to choose what that lens or what that angle is. So someone could be looking at an angle, for example, for me, it was my angle of myself and my narrative was the worst person ever. But another
Yeah.
person can have, no, it's like the most beautiful person ever. So it's a lot of taking what life gives us and our cards and what we could do to make the best of it. So, Ellie, with talking about just all of how can we allow creativity in our life and the importance of it, I think the major question here that we need our viewers to understand is one, how can we allow more of that play and childlike awe and happiness in our life? And then the second question is, why do you think that's important? How and why does that bring benefits to like our own mental health or even just helping us become the best versions of ourselves? So, two-part question. Answer that however you would like to.
Whoa. Yeah. Okay. So first question I think you mentioned was like, how do we incorporate it, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think a huge thing, and that this is something that I've learned from my own takeaways of like, how do you kind of like if you can, and find little pockets where you could slow down your life a little bit, like because like as we were talking like in our session so far together is like we've talked about like the pressures of being very transactional, right? We're going from point A to point B and like we're planning things out and so you lose that ability to just be in the now. And I see this a lot, obviously, I'm very fortunate to be in Hawaii and you see examples of this often where it's like people will spend a full day at a beach, right? And like you could just live in the now. And I think if you can, with our viewers, is like kind of like, take into account like, how, and this is all about like, first step I think is self reflection, right? And first step is just understanding, kind of mapping out like, what are you thinking about or what are you spending your day? A typical day, like what does that look like? And if it is like constantly planning something out or like, you're rushing from being a native New Yorker, it's like, I know that you rush from one place to the other, right? And
Mhm.
then kind of like move with enough time like away from New York now. I'm like, what's the rush? Like,
Yeah.
we can just kind of take that stroll. And like, of course, like marrying my husband, Jeremy, and like he's an LA guy and also just so he has a little bit of that more laid back,
Yeah. Yeah.
lifestyle. And so really like I benefited from that a lot because it was I think that helped open up my eyes into thinking like, even when we're on vacations or, when we're doing anything with our days, it's not, it's not about the like getting from one place to another and like doing those things. It is like
Mhm.
all of it. Right. And kind of just letting there be space for all of it because we can have all of it. Like, I think that's something that's like, first step is taking a little like note of like how your day is, right? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel um anxiety, right? From having to accomplish all these things. And then kind of like, all right, does it have to be accomplished all in one day, right? Like can we take a couple things out to just alleviate trying to jam pack our day, but then like now kind of allowing space for maybe the boredom to seep in, right? But with
Mhm.
boredom, it's like there's also that space for, getting to imagine, right? Like if we're all super transactional, there's not going to be that space. So creating that space, I think, is the biggest thing. And then the second thing, what was the second question?
I think it was well, first question was how can we allow that into our life? And I think second question is why is creativity, this
Important.
childlike awe, imagination so important for
Yeah.
like our mindset and mental health?
Ah, okay. So I think so this will kind of like tie into my parents. So like I know I was like, oh shoot, maybe there might have been like a little bit more of a negative lens on my parents, which is not true by
Okay,
any
okay.
means. I was like, oh shoot. But no, something that I want to say that I'm like, oh man, has been a really, really good model on like why it is important to have this mindset and have this like wonder going through life. Um, is it like because first off, like having that wonder like really just keeps you young, like through your entire life, like
Mm,
being able to like live, right? And why it's like super important is we touched on it a little bit of like you just don't want life to pass you by, like right? Like we don't want that um where we don't notice what everything that life has to offer. And also like you so like the example I want to give was like with my mom's like I love kind of seeing the way my mom lives her life. Like,
mm,
even when I'm like, when I think back to the younger days where I'm like, even when we were stressing, right? Or like, they just came to the States and they are, um, like there's like financial struggles, there's pressures, they don't understand the language. My mom always tapped into, and she's like innately very creative as well, but I think she also like really kept those juices kind of flowing. And
mm,
so like she always had a way of just being like, I want to learn about this and I want to keep learning. And so she would like from our childhood, like from my elementary school projects, she would be like, oh, well, like, let's kind of figure this out and work on this together. And she would like, I think we did some like paper mache stuff. She like did felt feathers for one of my like bird projects at elementary school. And like now looking back, I'm like, wow, um, there was like that excitement that I would see in her eyes when she got to do some of those like art projects and like do it with me. And I've seen that carry over too, where it's like, even like now, so both my parents are retired and they are like globe trotters. I have to plan. I know it's so awesome to see and like, but I have to plan maybe like a year in advance to like figure out my schedule with them. Like, hey, will you guys be like, do you guys want to come visit us like next year?
yeah, yeah.
But no, yeah, so they are retired, and something that's super cool is like she still sees things with awe. And I think sometimes like, if we're adventurous, right? Like um we can be like, oh, we've been on this kind of a hike before, or like, we've seen a waterfall before, but like my mom has a way of always being like, whoa, this is so cool. Like
Hmm.
she just sent me a text and she's like, this is a super fancy, McDonald's in Italy. Like, you've seen plenty of McDonald's before, but that's the thing. I think it's like still having that perspective to be like, this is new. Because the
Mm,
second that you think something's not new, then like I think that's when we get into the rut of like it's mundane, or like, oh, like been there, done that, or like, you start like it starts losing interest or it starts dulling. And I think there's something that's always new or always slightly different, or slightly, like there's always a different lens that we need to foster that in order to keep enjoying our lives, right? And that's where I see with like I was like reading a book and it mentioned like um kind of like being a child at heart. And this author went on a listening tour of all these elementary school kids. And he was like, I gained so much from that. And then he was like, wait, hold on. I also want to get data points and perspectives from like the older generation. And he also realized in that generation as well, he was like, the ones that still question life and still was like, wow, I still have so much to learn about. Like they were the most like alive, right? They were the
Mm.
most like lively, like also like healthy, like, you
Yeah.
know, because they wanted to go out and like they weren't defeated by like life, or also like they weren't like, oh, like I've seen it all, right? Like
Yeah.
there's still so much to like see. So that's where I think it's a super beneficial thing because once your mindset is done with something,
Hmm.
then that's it, you're done, right? And
Yeah.
so how do you keep fostering that of like, there's more to see, or there's a different way of seeing things, and like, it's, not getting, I think in our generation too, we are afforded those opportunities and not taking those for granted of being like, oh, I've been there, I've done that, I've, been able to travel here or there. Like, I think, um, having that perspective of like, there's always something to offer is
Hmm.
like what's going to kind of bring the longevity for life.
Yeah. You bring up a huge emphasis on curiosity. And I feel like if we
Yeah.
don't have that kind of curiosity, that's what makes life like super mundane. I think
Yeah.
in I'm not sure if it was like a story or saying something, Jay Shetty, he talked about how this monk or he himself went on a walk every single day. It was the same walk, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
what made it interesting every single time was trying to notice like different things about it. Like, oh, I didn't know that flower was there before, or I didn't know
Yeah.
that rock was there before. And that kind of brings that energy and, like you said, life out of you to be able to experience things. And I feel
Yeah.
like if we don't have the curiosity anymore to life, then we're not making the best of what we are given as a gift, right?
Exactly.
So I think
Oh,
curiosity is just a huge thing.
yeah. Also, a good example of that is so here in Hawaii, there is a hike called Coco Head. And it is a insane hike. Anyone that's like listening and wants to look it up, it is like straight uphill, like stairmasters. It is an insane hike, and a lot of like the locals or people that live here will use it as a workout. And there is this lady. Her name is Jilly. She is 67 years old. She
Oof.
is on this hike every day, every single morning. So if anyone wants to, come visit and explore the island, and you guys have Coco Head as your bucket list, if you get up early, she's always there, like from I think like 5:30 to 6:30 or whatnot.
Mm.
She's there. She is, and you can definitely hear her voice. She is very like bubbly and like she's living life, and
Yeah.
she's an awesome example too. Because I'm like, you are doing this hike every day, multiple too. Like so, she'll like do the full thing, and then she'll do the upper half like maybe 2 or 3 times,
Oh.
and then yeah, and the upper half is like the steeper part, by the way. And so she'll do that, and like you could just, it is just so cool hearing her. She's having conversations with different people. Like
Mm.
that's also, I think that's also part of the curiosity is like sometimes we are so um stuck in like our little bubbles where it's like that whole conversation or like that whole theme of like, we have social media, we have all this technology sort of working towards us of like for us and keeping us
Mm.
interconnected, but we're not actually having all those like face to face conversations anymore, so it's like kind of like that's a whole different conversation of like
Yes.
technology, right? But like, yeah, like she is having those face to face conversations, and like, the hike stays the same, right? Like, and it's pitch black usually, or like, just not, there's not a lot of sunlight yet in the
Mm.
early mornings. So it's like, unlike the monk, like she may not be able to like take in and appreciate like different parts of the hike or like, the nature of it, if
Mm.
it's changing. But like she is talking to people. And that's what's changing every day, right? Like, she's getting to have those conversations and just like, that's what doesn't make it mundane for her.
Mhm.
And it's just so cool to see because like, she's always so awesome. Like, I'm always so happy. And she always brightens my day whenever I see her. And she's hiking up the hill and then everyone's like, oh my God, like this old lady is like crushing it. And I'm like, guys, you don't understand. This girl does this like multiple times a day. And like,
Mhm. It
you
is crazy.
underestimate her. But yeah, but no, it like, I think that's a really good example of like that childlike, like curiosity, wonder, and wanting to connect to people like that carries you through, right? Like,
Mhm.
and it's not immature. It's not, there's a difference between being childish versus childlike and all those. It's like she gets to be lively and enjoying life. And she may not be globetrotting, right? Or she may not be doing, a bunch of different things, but like this hike, this Cocoa Head hike is her adventure, right? Every day. And, she gets to connect to different people each day. So it's really cool to, have that be a good example and reminder.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a prime example. And remember that curiosity mindset is a growth mindset, and that's what we
Yeah.
want to continue doing. So,
Yeah.
Elliot, I just want to say thank you for your time and just everything that you've taught us about healing, either healing our inner child or bringing the inner child out of us, because I think it's super important about creativity and it radiates off of you for sure. I don't think I've ever seen you down in the dumps or ever like not looking at a situation positively. And that's something like I'm working towards as well. So thank you for being just, inspiration to me, being a role model to me in terms of positivity and making sure that my inner child is having fun just like how you are. And I'm grateful that our stars have crossed paths and just everything,
Yeah.
couldn't have done this without obviously Michelle and having us volunteering and yeah, I'm grateful for where our relationship with us and your family and Jeremy and obviously all your kids will go, and I just can't wait to be with you guys once again. So thank you again
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you for having me. Maybe it is, I think maybe the advice a little bit is like maybe connecting outside of your generation. I think that there's so much
Mm,
value in being able to connect and learn from a little bit outside your generation. Cause I think sometimes like when we are connecting with like the people in our age group, it's like we're all going through the same like stuff and like, the
yeah,
same
yeah,
shit. And we're like in the dumps of like, all right, this sucks, right? Like we're our jobs, we're trying to look for new jobs. We're, thinking of buying a home, like all those things, those milestones, right, are like in our faces all day long. So like it could have a negative, like,
right, right.
like, environment, but then kind of like, I think being able to bring in those other connections of like little kids' perspectives and older generations' perspectives, like I think that is so valuable because you can kind of like see like where your roots are and then where you're headed, right? And like be able to learn from that. So I think that's a huge thing of like if you don't have those connections, maybe finding those opportunities, right? If it's volunteering or finding those different groups to build those connections and see things from a little bit of a different lens.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Looking for those opportunities to allow you to put yourself in a space that's outside of your normal bubble, I think, as
Yeah,
you phrased
yeah.
earlier. Yeah. All right, Ellie, let's get into the big three questions. These are the last three questions that will leave a final impact on our viewers. My
All
first
right.
question to you is, what does becoming the highest version of yourself mean to you?
Ooh. I think the highest version of ourselves, and we touched a little bit on this, is like it's a never ending process. And I think I'm gonna take a little jab at like highest as like I'm gonna like change your whole branding. You're like, hold on, wait, I gotta change. But it's like highest means like that's it sometimes, right? Like best or highest, it means like that's the point, right? That's it. But like in reality, we're never going to reach our highest version of ourselves. And I think that's something to like acknowledge is like, it's ongoing. It's going to keep going. Right. And so understanding that like, you don't like just hit a point and that's it. Or like same thing with our hikes, right? Like it's all the stuff in between it. Like, yes, the view is really cool at the top, but like, and then even then it's like, that's not it. You're not done, right? Like you
Yeah.
still got to hike down. You still got like life still happens. So I think that's the biggest thing of like, um, don't let that be daunting, but let that be like, oh, like it's a continuous process and it's always, and so don't stop, right? Don't stop being curious. Don't stop being creative. Don't stop, being a child. Like those things, keep it going. And I think that's where like we can be the best version of ourselves, right? But it's still always gonna, yeah, like it's never ending, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you definitely touched on a great point, and I feel like everyone's definition of being the highest version of themselves will always change wherever part of
Yeah.
life that you're in, right? Before you had kids, I'm pretty sure there was a definition that you had, and once you had kids, that definition has changed, and yeah, it's not like you're starting from square one, but in a way you are, and like learning over and over again. I
Yeah.
know at first, I think like last year or 2 years ago, like the highest version of myself was becoming mentally well. And then after graduating from therapy, I was like, okay, now I can focus on my physical. But then in recent events, something has changed that definition of highest version because now I'm going back to that mental part because of just trying to heal, trying to um, not re, what's it? Just making sure that's healthy all over again. So the definition is always going to change.
Yeah.
So I completely agree
Oh,
with you.
yeah. And I think, what would be really cool with your podcast, and I hope this like continues because you're doing an amazing job with like the podcast, your guests, and like, dude, do like one of those like, I don't know, 5 year, like have some of those returning guests come back and
Yes.
like imagine us being like, the stuff that we said in the last podcast, let's just scrap the whole thing. That's not the point.
Exactly.
But like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, we might be in different phases, different things, but constantly just like letting, like absorbing life and letting that kind of like fester and let it build and kind of take those as inputs to help guide you, right? Like I think that's huge. If you stop letting those things come in as opportunities or just in general, like actually interacting with life, and being a participant in life, then like you mentioned, it's like then you're stagnant, right? Like you're an autopilot, you're stagnant, you're not growing, you're not figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and then not being able to reflect because you have nothing to reflect back on, essentially.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. I think did have a thought, but let's move on to the second question. the second the second question is, what do you think everyone could be kinder to themselves about?
What makes you giddy? Like what? Like so? This is a that's a weird response. But like letting those things really shine through. I think I see it a little bit, and this is like a parenting moment with my 17-year-old right now, where it's like what's cool and not cool. So you kind of you like dampen or kind of put a little bit of like a like a barrier on those things that excites you or like those initial reactions because you're like, oh, maybe that's not the cool way to respond. Or like, I like kind of some of those touch points of like, seeing Mickey or like, if you're a Disney fan and being like, oh my God, that was so cool. Like now, like, I think some people might, the outside external factors might just be like, oh, you've been there so many times, right? Like, I think obviously saying it like very simply is like, obviously not let external factors um rule how you act, but really touching base with like what makes you happy, right? What makes you excited and actually letting those emotions express itself because as you mentioned too, it's like it can radiate and it can influence other people around you, right? So if you are dampening it and if you are not actually living authentically, like being like, this is so cool, this is so awesome, or like having those little positive outbursts, like those can really positively influence other people around you and you don't know it, right? So I think that's like something I've noticed, to be kind to yourself of like what makes you happy and express, like really expressing it, not just being like in like in a little quiet voice being like, oh yay, like like really I think like be loud about it. Like, and I think that's the thing, right? Like be loud. Be like that's how you be kind to yourself. Take up that space and be happy. And I think that is so infectious, like with just people around you. So yeah, that's my big takeaway of how to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I really do need to learn how to really express more of that happiness. I feel like I've taken on my parents how they like express things if things are happy.
Yeah.
I think part of it is trauma of getting good grades or getting a promotion or anything like that, and they're like, cool. But like they're
No.
cool is like us being like, like really
What?
excited and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to see that, but I finally understood like, or that's something I'm also working on is just
Yeah.
trying to be more expressive about it.
But Randy, be kind to yourself because you are expressive. And I think that's a huge thing of why we even became friends because you're like, dude, your calves are huge. Like, you said that to my husband. And I think that
Yeah.
like generated that, like just opened the space, right? Like, because everyone can be awkward. Everyone could like not know how to start a conversation or how to like initiate, right? And you were expressive. You were kind to yourself. You were, like unapologetically yourself. And I think that was like the basis of how our friendship started. So I think like that was, and you were loud, you took up space. So it's like, that was awesome. And that's how we're still friends now and like building on our friendship, which is so cool.
No, I appreciate you saying that because to me, from my own perspective, outside of that moment, I'm definitely not unapologetically myself, which is interesting. But yeah, I'm just happy I did that day, and
Yeah.
obviously just expanding on a relationship now. Ellie, my last question to you is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh my goodness. This is so hard. Okay, let me think. Well, okay, for sure I know who it came from. But I don't want to give him like too much of an ego boost. So it's like definitely from my
Is it
husband.
Jeremy?
Yeah, yeah.
Of course it is.
So I'm gonna have him stop watching our podcast like before I answer this question, so he's not gonna be
Okay.
like, but no. So it will be definitely my husband. And I think he came into my life in a very and it came in at a point where you know very much figuring out myself out and figuring who I am and I wouldn't say like advice per se, but he had a lot of patience and had a lot of confidence in me and who I am. And I think so like advice wise, he I would say like was very intentional on being like, no, tell me how you feel. Like, right. And maybe this does tie in where in the sense of like, stop putting so many filters on your responses to certain people. And we built that over the years a little bit of like, we filter the way we respond to our parents. We filter the way that we respond to like our friends and family. And like, he was really good about being like, no, like, give it to me. Like, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're thinking. Stop filtering it. Stop like, um, holding it back a little bit because you don't want to upset someone or maybe it doesn't come out the right way the first time. Like, so I think that was the best advice for me of like understanding that I can speak my mind and I don't like I think, a little bit of like growing up in, with my um Asian, background of you kind of have to like be a little bit submissive of like, all right, this is not your time to speak, you got to take it in. And of course also language barriers. So also like translating that and then trying to express it in Mandarin is like a whole thing, right? But so he was like, no, like tell me how it is right now. And to this day now he's like, shoot, maybe this kind of bit me in the ass because now he's like, when we're arguing or whatever, have a disagreement, he's like, whoa, hold on.
Peel back. Just because I said you were annoying doesn't mean you need to call me a bitch, okay?
You don't have to call me out on things and like, be super abrupt about it. Yeah. But no. I think that was the best advice of kind of like, that's really kind of what set me a little bit more free and being able to be a little bit more expressive, was having that like, oh, okay, like, and having that acceptance and, a patience and acceptance to like have someone that's in your corner wanting to hear it all, hear it raw, yeah, yeah. So I think that is probably the best advice or, support system, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's definitely something that we need to take away from, especially with an intimate relationship, any relationship that you're having, because
yeah,
it's the raw realness, authentic genuinity, and that's what we need to do in those like difficult conversation like environments. So again, Ellie, thank you so much for your time and your story and just everything that you have been expressing and giving to our viewers in terms of advice about letting your inner child out and having that childlike awe so that we can continue to love life as it continues to go on. So before I do my final conclusions, do you want to drop your family's like TikTok adventure, Instagram account?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to follow us on our adventures, you can on TikTok or Instagram. It's R, like the letter R, and then Big Adventures. And yeah, you can keep tabs on us. Don't stalk my kids, but yeah.
Yes, please do not do that. You'll have not only Jeremy, but me as well being protective. So guys, if you guys enjoyed any part of this episode, please make sure you clip it, tag me and Ellie in it. And as always, let's fall in love with the process of getting better every day and becoming the highest version of ourselves. I love y'all so much. Bye.
Thanks, Andy.